So I'm not going to run this panel as a round robin, so I'm going to ask a question, and if you want to take that question, please physically put your hand in the air. If you've got questions and you want to get involved from the participants, then put your digital hands in the air. That would be absolutely great. And if nobody offers to answer it, then I will absolutely pick on you, as you know. So be prepared. Right, I'm going to start off with the way that I think Praveen started the whole thing off, and that is really looking at how do you get balance in your contracts when you don't actually know what you're really contracting for. So we're seeing a big move towards an agile sourcing approach as well. So that's lots and lots of conversation going through. Instead of doing a traditional RFP and marking that RFP, it's a much more consultative approach. So how do you come to a balanced contract view when things are ever changing? Thank you, Kit.
Okay, I'll offer a start of a 10 in relation to that, because agile approach is obviously the darling of the commercial and technical folks, and the absolute nightmare of the lawyer, in the sense that the lawyers, we love certainty, and agile, as you've rightly said, Kerry, doesn't. That certainty does not go hand in glove with an agile approach. I think that the biggest mistake that you can make is to try to retrofit a waterfall methodology based contract structure into an agile way of working. I think that's just a recipe for disaster. I think what you need to do is embrace the fact that there is uncertainty and change and iteration, and that's obviously one of the strengths of the processes, and look instead to see if you can adjust the commercial arrangements in a way to incentivize the right kind of behaviors. So what I mean by that is that the worst case is a supplier might say, this is brilliant working agile because it's a T&M model with very little deliverable responsibility, and I can just keep on accepting new requirements from users without ever asking whether it's really in line with the project vision at all, because everything I do, I'm just going to be paid more for. So that's the kind of worst case scenario for the customer. But if you were to model the commercials to say, look, we have at least a target price and an idea of at least a minimum kernel of what's to be delivered. So if we run beyond that target price or target time frame, whatever it may be, then yes, you will still be paid, but you will be paid less. So that the supplier starts to have some skin in the game and starts to have a incentive to try to run things as efficiently and leanly as possible, and to push back on nice to have functionality rather than must haves. Now you start to have more of an alignment of interests. Or if you were to put an element of the charges at risk to a particular outcome or a particular time frame, again, you start to move back towards alignment of commercial interests, because then that's the thing that would really make the thing more likely to succeed.
And do you get much pushback on that? And then I'll invite you in, Charles.
It depends. Obviously, it depends upon the extent to which you reduce charges or the amount that you want to place at risk. But the more savvy and more commercially minded suppliers, I think, get with the program on that, and they realize that there is a valid concern from customers that pricing does not go out of control, because unfortunately we have seen agile projects where customer went into it thinking, right, we will get somewhere with this, and that before they know where they are, they're 5 or 6 months beyond the point where they thought the project would be completed, and they're already double the budget.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, Charles, please.
Yeah, look, I mean, everything Kit said there, I completely agree with. I think the point on agile processes almost being the bane of a commercial lawyer's life might be accurate. And one of the things that we've done sort of at the outset of projects is rather than to look to define service descriptions and the sort of things that you may have had for more easily defined services, is to look at user stories and outcomes in that way. So you've got an idea of where you want to get to, and it might be relatively high level, but at least to have something where you can say, look, this is the sort of thing that we want what we're buying to look like at the end. But and we don't necessarily know the process or how we're going to get there, but we've got an aim. And at least to have something down on paper in your contract, then at least it points the parties to what you're trying to achieve, and you've got buy-in from that regard.
Yeah, so does it mean that you as lawyers are involved in the life cycle of these arrangements so much more now than you used to be? Because there's going to be constant movement and constant requirement to relook at contractual aspects?
Well, not if the agile process is working properly, then no, it shouldn't require lawyers, because that should be done at the project level. And in fact, that's always been one of the perceived benefits of agile, which it enables change to be dealt with operationally rather than requiring lawyers to come back and assist with the drafting of change control notes. But lawyers get involved, yeah, unfortunately, when things go wrong. So if you do have something which is set up which doesn't incentivize the parties in the right way, then yeah, you're likely to see the lawyers come back involved, but unfortunately not in the most constructive of ways.
And are we seeing much of that, or on the whole, are we getting it right?
It's difficult to say. I think agile, I think, is very successful as an internal methodology, because if you're doing it as an in-house project, then your commercial interests are aligned from day one. Where it's used externally, I'm sure there are lots of good examples where it's all gone swimmingly, but unfortunately, if you look at some of the cases that have been reported in the press, then unfortunately, agile tends to raise its head as an example of why things went wrong. So one of the more recent cases that was in the press was IBM and Soteria. It's probably one of the biggest technology failures in recent times that's got into the public domain. And if you get into the case description there, lo and behold, a failure of the parties to work properly on an agile basis was one of the early causes of delay and problems.
Okay, Praveen, from an advisory perspective, have you seen agile working to great effect?
So yes and no. So agile as a term, we are using it for iterative sourcing. What we are seeing is it typically has starts off with a pilot and goes into a kind of a conventional sourcing, but the boundary is not very rigid. So at some point you have started with a pilot and you do a smaller scale sourcing and implementation, and then as you proceed, you get to know new things. You have a significant change in the scope because you've got to know new things that need to be done, and with that new scope, you do another round of sourcing. And of course, every time we do this, we end up circling this with legal, because that's something that like just from a risk perspective, we have to do it. So yeah, I understand where Kit is coming from. It's quite taxing for the procurement leaders, the legal, because you have to do it in an iterative way, but still have to undergo this process of internal compliance every time. But we've seen this happen. It's happening. For example, in a chemical plant, we're doing this automation, and they're like 20 packing, 20 odd, maybe 22 packing chutes, and we do the automation on one of them. We set up. We procured the IoT tags, got it set up in one of the chutes, and use the data to arrive at what next for the rest of them. And then once the data came in, there was so much of change in the both from a executive leadership's priorities standpoint, as well as what the data returned. There was so much of change that we ended up doing another round of sourcing. So when I say agile in that deck, it's basically the iterative sourcing which builds itself, keeps growing, and at the end of the day, it might end up becoming a conventional sourcing at the end.
Okay, thank you. So Andrew, I'm really keen to understand how you actually look after the contract when you're potentially engaging 7 different organisations with potentially no really clear end goal, because again, for you, it must be massively iterative.
Yeah, it is. And actually, there was something I was going to mention on the last point. And I mean, for me, waterfall and agile, very much familiar from a development point of view, but from a contracting point of view, quite an interesting term actually, and very, very interested to hear that vendors are looking to go down that route. I mean, my previous role, I used to run professional services for UiPath, and of course we were trying to sell services along with the products all the time. And what worked quite well for us, and I don't know whether you would class this as agile, was like a service credits model. So what happened at that point was when you bought the software, you would also buy a package of service credits, which could be consumed over a period of time, be that 1, 2, or 3 years. And then we had like work packages based upon the customer's journey. So if they were brand new to automation, we would say, actually, here are some of the packages and prices that you would consume as part of those service credits. You also had the ability to buy more credits or get back. I think the challenge was always in the grey area, was always if they didn't use all those service credits, is it a use or lose them, or do they get them returned? And I think getting them returned is challenging from a finance point of view, because you're not recognizing that revenue, and there's a lot of issues around revenue recognition there as well. So I kind of wanted to add that point to the previous and see whether the panelists have thought that would be more of an agile approach, or whether that's just traditional but done in a different sense.
Right, that one looks like one for you, Charles or Kit, to answer. So what are you doing around service credits at the moment?
By service credits, I think we're talking there effectively about sort of banked hours, Andrew. So you've got a period of, you've got a set amount of time that you purchase up front that you can then go and use. I think that's slightly different to the way we as lawyers sometimes use service credits as a sort of as a slap on the wrists for failure to deliver. So yeah, it is a model we've seen, and it's certainly one. I suppose it lends itself to agile in the fact that you've got you've got an amount that you can consume over a period of time, whilst also having a pricing methodology that works for a supplier, where they've got a guarantee of the amount of money that they're going to receive from the deal itself. So it can be beneficial to both parties, but you can draft into that contract what you want, I suppose, in terms of how you deal with hours that are unused at the end of a process. But you're right, suppliers are very resistant to refunds in those scenarios. I mean, it's usually a use it or lose it scenario. But I think from my experience, it tends to be the case that most customers think they're going to overuse and they're going to be buying more. So a lot more of the negotiation we've had on those contracts is around, what's the pricing in the future for the procurement of more hours and more time. But yeah, I think that's a sensible approach, and it's certainly one that can help clients that are not used to buying that sort of technology.
Well, the only thing I would add in terms of service credits is that, as Charles says, very often it's seen as being a slap on the wrist for less than anticipated service delivery, if I could put it that way. I think a lot of suppliers, on the hand, are concerned that if the customer really isn't suffering as a result of this, it's just a way for the customer to get a discount on its pricing, which is not very conducive to the right kind of behaviours. In a lot of deals that we see, or at least some of the heat of that discussion can be taken out by saying that if service credits do arise, at least a proportion of it doesn't just disappear altogether, but instead is put into some kind of innovation fund, so that it's still available for the customer to utilize, but is done by way of the supplier providing services in kind, rather than actually having to give any kind of rebate against its monthly charges. So that also addresses the issue that quite often one of the problems with incentivization and innovation is it's a good idea in principle, but the customer just hasn't got the ready budget to do it. So if you've got that kind of ring-fenced amount of money being set aside for it, then that can help to address that as well. Just killing two birds with one stone.
So Praveen, you put your hand up.
Yeah, so I wanted to add on to the service credit. So we started with the 2 versions of service credits. Actually, what we were discussing about was service credits as in the prepaid coins, so as to say, which you use to procure cloud and cloud services or any services in an agile model. That was the service credits I think Andrew was talking about. And Kit also mentioned about the service credits, which we use to basically provide incentive to the supplier to perform beyond expectations. And we also use the service credits as a disincentive or rather as a penalty for breaching the SLAs. So service credits get credited from suppliers to us as the SLAs are breached, right? So So I'll not go into that one. I think that's part of conventional sourcing, and we are doing it in agile sourcing as well. But the thing that Andrew mentioned about service credits as a payment route, right? As a prepaid payment route. So we are seeing both these modes. A service credits, which is like a prepaid payment route. These will be in the form of, for example, AWS credits. You can purchase services over AWS over on that. Those are one sets. The other one has a postpaid connotation, which is what I was talking about when I said consumption based pricing and rate card based pricing. We are not talking rate cards of individuals. We're talking rate cards for consumptions. If we are consuming 10,000 sensors, for example, what should be the rates? If we are consuming 50,000, what should be the rates? So things like that. So yeah, they're both these models are in place, the prepaid or the consumption-based postpaid. In either case, our recommendation always is that we do not commit a lot upfront. In the prepaid mode, we do not buy service credits in bulk so much that we are not able to consume in the year. In postpaid, of course, we don't commit to too large a minimum order quantity, right? There will be a minimum order quantity you would be buying in bulk of maybe 1,000, 5,000. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about.
Thank you. Right, so one of the other points came up was do not contract for longer than 3 years without a very clear exit. Well, obviously at the GSA we say do not contract without a very clear exit, full stop. But I'd be interested to actually understand what the tenure and terms of contracts that you're negotiating at the moment are, and whether we've seen a dramatic change in the length of contracts. So Kit, over to you.
Well, if we focus for the moment upon the hyperscale contracts, or cloud service provisions as a whole, the immediate response a lot of the cloud providers will say is, yeah, but our contracts allow you to terminate for convenience anyway, so you're all fine. That's not a requirement. It's much more flexible. It's turn off, turn on rather. And if you looked at their basic provisions, that would be the case. But for any sizable deal, you'll find that there is usually an addendum, which is some kind of pricing commitment. So if you want to have the benefit of the kind of deep discounts that you can obtain from the hyperscalers, that will only come about if you have made minimum revenue commitments, which you then can't get out of by terminating for convenience, or at least not without paying somewhat prohibitive payments. So you need to look beyond what's available in the basic documentation and look at the commercial reality in terms of the way that these deals are structured. So if I look at the deals and deal lengths to get the kind of discounts that the clients want to have, remarkably, the deal lengths end up being very similar to what their kind of outsourcing arrangements, so typically between 3 to 5 years. And part of the reason for that is because aside from the cost of the services themselves and the discounts that you try to get, you've also got to factor in the cost of running the procurement exercise in the first place, doing the migration and transition exercise, and not wanting to do that too frequently. So obviously it will vary depending upon the size of the deal and the nature of the services, but if it's a larger scale deal, 3 to 5, I would say, would still be what we would most readily see.
Okay, and again, it's a sort of percentage. How often are the enterprise buyers going and negotiating directly themselves with the hyperscalers, and how often are they going down the sort of like managed service sort of route? What are you seeing there?
We do, as Praveen was saying, we do see providers going through the marketplaces of the providers, but they tend to be in relation to the smaller value add type applications. So for anything really substantial, so any kind of business critical app, for example, which might be hosted upon one of the platforms, they tend still to negotiate that direct.
Okay. Thank you. Charles, yes, you put your hand up.
I was just going to add just quickly to the point Kit was making, which was maybe on the sort of the lower level of the deal value, but still, I think still relevant for procurement of new technology. Clients recently who have been purchasing services, looking to restructure their deals down from 7 and 5 year terms to shorter, more flexible periods, seeing a knock-on effect in terms of price going up between 5 and 15%. Being offered by suppliers on that basis, because they're not being able to generate the revenue that they're expecting from those contracts. That's been on the sort of renegotiation side of things that we've seen recently. So yes, I mean, building yourself in more flexibility and the ability to move away can be helpful, but it does have a knock on the bottom line.
Yeah, so that actually leads quite nicely into my next question, which is really looking at the retail price index and all the inflation that we've been experiencing. So we've been talking in the past mainly about FTE related models and how a lot of the service providers have been going to their clients and renegotiating those deals, predominantly so that they can actually increase the salaries of the people working on their sourcing arrangements. What are you guys advising on and seeing on, you know, the whole inflationary pressure issue that we're experiencing? And any one of you can take this, although I imagine it's going to go back to Kit and Charles in the first instance, and I'll find a different question for you, Andrew.
All right, well, let me give it a start of a 10. So I think, as my fellow panelists have alluded to, the indexation provisions are certainly under far more scrutiny than they ever used to be. A bit like, you know, the force majeure provisions, nobody ever used to pay any attention to them until COVID came along, and then suddenly everybody dusted down their contracts and tried to work out what the implication of those ones are as well. There are a number of negotiations going on. So I've got one of the members which is actually a BPO deal, but the supplier has come back and said, look, I know we signed a contract which did not provide for indexation, but we're bleeding. We never thought we'd be incurring these costs, and we are, and can you help us? At least they had the good grace to couch it in those terms. And it then puts a customer in a difficult position. You know, on one hand, they've got the budget, and they probably got the contractual ability to insist upon the pricing remaining as it is, but nobody wants a supplier who is bleeding, because at the end of the day, they're all human. There's probably an individual there who is tasked with ensuring that the contract delivers an acceptable margin, and he or she will therefore be constrained to find ways in which they can try to economize, try and cut corners, start to be a little bit more pedantic when it comes to change of control requests. So if you aren't amenable to having a commercial discussion with your supplier in those circumstances, then yeah, you're probably setting yourself up for a difficult relationship for the remainder of the duration of the contract. What we have seen, however, is customers saying, okay, well, that's a conversation we can have, but let's broaden out then the discussion. So if we're going to do this for you, what can you do for us back? So in one case, for example, there was a case where the supplier in question also had a software arm, and we could say, well, you should extend us some of the benefit of your software, which is just, you know, it costs you nothing other than some foregone license revenue to give us some of that software. But if you want us to help with some of your services commitments, then just give us some software to sweeten the deal.
That's fair enough. We've also seen it where sort of like, you know, big customers, enterprise buyers have turned back and said, if I know that you're going to pass the price increase down to your employees because they're the ones that are feeling the crunch, then I'm actually willing to do it. I don't know if you've come across any examples like that and know whether that is contractually viable to actually deliver.
It's certainly doable, and I have seen provisions which say that, yeah, we will give you more money, but only to the extent that you warrant that you have increased the salaries of your staff, so that you know that it's going through to them. Yeah, I've seen things like that.
Right, one for you then, Andrew. So alliances, we've seen different types of alliances come and go, and quite often they're fraught with difficulties because obviously you're managing the desires, the cultures, the personalities of lots and lots of different individual brands. How are you sort of ensuring that the IAC can actually deliver to the customers' end requirements? You're on mute.
Yeah, firstly, there are challenges. It's been quite eye-opening actually, trying to bring together all of these product companies to work together. As I mentioned in one of my points in my presentation, you know, they don't normally work very well together, and you know, and I think a lot of product companies, they have their core offering, and then they build additional components because they have to, because, you know, they don't want the customer to go and get something else. So they say, okay, well, I don't know, we do IDP, but actually we've also got some workflow built into there because it's kind of a nice to have requirement that is going to be useful for some of our customers. So when we brought them all into the room at first, one of the challenges was, oh, well, yeah, but we also do that, and we also do that. So it was really defining what is the unique selling point and what is the best in class technology that that platform player is bringing together. I think also, if you look at the products that are within the IAC as an example, they're not the big players. They're not the the Salesforces of the world, the UiPaths of the world, the SAPs of the world. So I think having that more, I guess, startup mentality and that I guess I'm going to use the word agile again, the ability to do business in an agile way means that actually they are willing to work together and willing to deliver what's best solutions for the customer. I don't know if that will change as they get bigger and as their revenue lines increase and as they hire more employees. Does that relationship kind of become less close? I guess it all depends on what is the benefit that they're getting from the IAC as well. Are they getting leads and opportunities that are coming through? So is it a payback for them in the time and money that they're investing in them? So it's still probably too early to say at the moment. But yeah, there have been some challenges so far, but actually now that we've gone to market with this and we've started to see opportunities come in, actually I think everyone's glad that they invested the time and commitment into doing this.
Cool. So that obviously leads to the question whether Kit, Praveen or Charles have seen more discussions about alliances, whether you've done more contracting across alliances recently or not.
Very much so. I think there's a lot. I think that we are in the days of platforms, and if people want to therefore gain access to a broader scope of potential clients, inevitably it will mean working with a platform. And look, just take a couple of examples of deals that we've worked on a DLA, which are in the public domain. We had the London Stock Exchange cloud services deal with Microsoft, which was also then tied up with, and we will now work together in order to develop go-to-market strategies associated with market data, etc. And then a deal that I worked on, which was again involving Microsoft, but which was with Amadeus. And yes, there was a big cloud services deal, but it was also then tied up with a deal to do a go-to-market tie-up to look at ways in which cloud service and cloud native applications could be applied for the travel industry. So there's no magic to it. It's not just because there was a cloud deal in the offing anyway. It was because customers could realize that these are massive platforms who have a potentially transformative effect upon how they can access their clients.
Thank you. Right, we're really close to the end of time. So if there are any questions, you've got the best brains in the industry here right now to answer your questions. So please do put something in the chat. But without your questions, I can keep going for quite a long time. I've only got 4 minutes, but I'll keep going. So what are the major trends you are seeing that perhaps we haven't already talked about today? So if anybody's about to engage in a new tech or contract for anything, what advice would you give? What trends are you seeing that we've not discussed?
Well, the one that's overwhelming is generative AI. So the organizations need to have some proper structures in place as to how they're going to use this particular iteration of AI technology. And the AI has been around for ages, and most of the people on the call, I'm sure, will be very familiar with it. But I think it's fair to say that the publicity storm surrounding ChatGPT transformed the debate on it. Yeah. And we had an absolute firestorm of clients coming to us to say, what should we be doing about this? Should we have a policy on it? What's our risk associated with it? It's not as if these risks didn't exist before. It's just that the people have become a lot more aware of it. I think organizations need to be looking at not just how they are consciously applying AI in terms of their sourcing and solutions, but also how people within their organization may be utilizing it in a more ad hoc fashion without necessarily a degree of management control, and what implications that has for them.
Yeah, Charles, please.
Yeah, I'll just add to Kit's point, which is something that we've been seeing quite a bit of recently in respect of AI is advising clients on their internal compliance and policies in relation to IP created from AI and what the management around that is, and how driving employees to best practice in terms of utilizing AI and ensuring ownership of the stuff that a customer wants to keep ownership of. It's, you know, in terms of contracting, that's all part of your sort of contracting process and your agreement with suppliers. But there's also, as I say, the internal policy and compliance points as well that you've got to deal with, which is yeah, as I say, a separate story. Yeah, look, separate from that, I think from my perspective, I deal with a lot of FS institutions and also managed service and other providers that sell into financial services. And obviously one of the big things that's on our agenda is regulation and importance of, you know, looking at resilience of services and things like that. So there's a lot to consider for businesses operating in that space in terms of what you do, you know, to ensure that your product offering covers the rules that are in place in the EU and in the UK that are coming and across the world. Yeah, it's certainly, you know, it's causing a lot of time spent at higher level.
And where does the responsibility for the ethical use of AI reside right now? Is that still coming down to the legal teams to ensure that that's been looked after, or is that broadening out into the business?
I mean, look, from my perspective, from what I've seen, it's within internal legal functions or compliance teams within businesses themselves. I don't know if Praveen or Andrew have got a different insight.
Yeah, I would probably agree with you. Yeah, so in organisations that I've worked with, you know, who are utilising AI, machine learning, yes, of course, there's a level of ownership from the business in terms of how the model's trained and the data that they're providing to train these models. But yeah, you're right. In terms of from an ethical point of view, that would probably be more of a legal and compliance matter, from what I've seen.
Okay, right. Well, we are at time, so there were no questions. But thank you very much to all the participants for joining us. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. And a huge thank you to our panelists for joining us today. So thank you, Kit, thank you, Praveen, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Charles. And yes, we've got some key things to pick on up here. And I think obviously the best practice on generative AI is something that perhaps we should be looking at in the immediate term. So thanks for sharing that one, Kit. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.